Fairy Tamm, Second Generation, The Autobiography, Volume 2. Chapter 2. The Power of Kroll. For the fifth segment of the Key to Time, the Doctor and Romana travel to the marsh moon of Delta Magna. There, the time travelers become enmeshed in tensions between the barbaric native swampies, the gun runner Rom Dood, played by the wonderful Glyn Owen, and the crew of a refinery which is trying to drive the swampies away. In the midst of all this, the swampy god, a gargantuan squid named Kroll, is beginning to stir and is about to wreak havoc. So began work on my least favourite story, with other actors in the cast including Neil McCarthy, John Abernethy, Philip Maddock, and our very own John Leeson, who usually voiced Canine, taking the role of Doggeen. The trusty tin dog had been written out of this tale, as the marshy areas we were to film in would be impossible for him to negotiate. My old mate Terry Walsh also had a small role as the wonderfully monikered Mensch. As usual, he was on hand to supervise fights and stunts too. Tom, John, and I were always huddled in some corner or other during rehearsal, learning lines, or, more usually, poring over the Guardian crossword, at which we had become very adept over the course of the series. Unlike the frantic beginning to the Key to Time season, we were now all somewhat more relaxed in our approach, especially as Tom and I had now established a very successful working relationship. One week, John even made up his own cryptic crossword for us to solve. It was quite a feat, and we were most impressed. It took me and Tom a whole day to crack it. Meanwhile, our director, Norman Stewart, was marshalling the cast together in our final days of rehearsal before we set off to Woodbridge, Suffolk, where we would be staying for location filming. It was quite a difficult time for me, as I was the only woman among a group of blokes, and although they were very well behaved on the whole, I longed for some female company, which I luckily found in the shape of the makeup artist. Unusually, we had a very long 10 days on location, which stretched seemingly interminably ahead of us. I had bravely decided to drive to location this time, my latest Mini being a little more reliable than usual, and as I drove through the winding country lanes of Suffolk, I reflected on how the imminent filming would progress. In those days, although budget constraints affected the program quality, lavish spending was considered the norm when staying on location, unlike now when we poor thesps are accommodated in tiny box-like single bedrooms in two-store hotels during filming sojourns. As I swept round a bend, the hotel came into view, a large stately home, Elizabethan in style, with wings and gables, which proved to be just as sumptuous on the interior, with wood-panelled halls and cosy bedrooms, decked in rich chintzes. I settled in happily and spent the evening locating my fellow actors and looking over the script with them for the next day. The swamp. Oh well, at least I was not in a coal mine or underground cave. It was quite chilly, but I had several layers on underneath my utilitarian costume, which was not, admittedly, one of my favorites, but I had realized beforehand that there was not much point in trying to look glamourous for this story, as the conditions would be somewhat uncomfortable to say the least. I was proved right as we spent most of the day standing knee-deep in water, which pervaded my wellies with a creeping chill. Thank God the costume designer had suggested the rubber footwear. There were even more uncomfortable moments to come, with the night filming sequences of the scene where Romana is tied to a stake as a sacrifice to Kroll. It was, in a way, a homage to King Kong, especially with the native swampies dancing to a drumbeat outside a stockade wall and me impersonating Fay Ray. All in all, though, the glorious wide-open spaces of Suffolk were wonderfully bracing, and it was my first experience of being in a flat landscape, something of a change for a Yorkshire lass. The poor actors portraying the swampies did not have the luxury of any protection against the elements, however, and spent the day shivering half-naked under a threatening cloud cover. Moreover, their skin had been coloured green, using a product selected for its striking appearance on camera and its resistance to water. Unfortunately, no one had ordered the special solvent needed to remove the makeup, and as a result, the actors had to be dispatched to RAF Bentwaters at Woodbridge to take chemical showers. Despite these efforts, many of the swampy actors would sport a green tinge for weeks afterwards. Later, when we are shooting scenes at BBC Television Centre, the wretched unfortunates were banned from the canteen, where they had stained all the chairs green. Tom and I drove back to the hotel with some relief, having escaped any such discomfort, and decided to reward ourselves for having survived the first day's filming by repairing to a nearby wine bar in the town, where Tom, coincidentally, knew the owner, who was part-time actor. Glyn Owens spotted us leaving and invited himself along on our jaunt, a fact we were very happy with, as he proved to be a most amusing and entertaining companion. He was a very well-known TV actor at the time, and probably best known for his role in The Brothers, although he had a vast and varied body of work behind him. John Leeson, alas, was back at home in London, as he did not have any location scenes. He was greatly missed. This became our routine as the long shoot progressed, with Glyn becoming more and more outrageous as the days wore on, and we repaired to the little wine bar every evening, culminating one night in a karaoke-style rendition of Rhinestone Cowboy, complete with hip-swiveling, Elvis-like gyrations, arm-waving, and other nifty moves. We laughed till we cried. I could still see him now. Priceless. I had a day off from filming and decided to explore the small picturesque market town of Woodbridge. It was a lovely sunny day, and I had a very relaxing time strolling around the streets and peering into the various shops. In an estate agent's window, I noticed a small run-down ruin of a cottage for sale of the princely sum of £100. I still regret to this day not arranging a viewing, as Woodbridge has now grown into a trendy weekenders destination, with an average property price of £250,000 plus pounds. All well, easy to be wise with hindsight, I suppose, but bargains of this type are unheard of these days. One day, Tom and I had to take to the waters of the swamp in a small rowing boat. It was late afternoon, and the autumn light was failing. We had only a short time to complete the scene before the light went altogether, and heard our director, Norman, exhorting everyone to hurry up. A slight air of panic took hold as we thrust off from the bank, and ventured slowly to the middle of the rushy, murky water. Tom had gallantly elected to row the vessel, being taller and stronger. The reeds were quite tough to negotiate, honestly. Alas, the boat hit a tangled patch of weeds, and, as Tom was trying to hack his way through, he dropped the oar. It slipped silently under water. There was a brief gurgle, and then it was gone. Tom and I stared at each other in mingled horror and amusement. We were drifting further and further away from the film crew, who were only vaguely discernible in the distance, especially as it was now almost dark, and soon we were adrift in the middle of the huge swamp. What on earth were we going to do? The boat gave a sudden lurch as we bumped into something, a small grassy knoll, rather like an island. With one mind, Tom and I leaned over and pushed firmly against it, sending the boat back in the direction of the bank we had set out from, and towards the safe circle of our crew members. They were all wearing long fishing waders for the filming, and now a few of them manfully approached us, cutting a swathe through the freezing waters almost up to their waists. They grabbed the prow of our vessel and hauled us back to safety. Whew! Saved by the cameraman. Next day, Norman reshot the scene with both of us rowing this time. But the revels in the wine bar after that little episode were somewhat livelier than usual that night, I can tell you. Another mishap involved the loss of the tracer. Tom claims it was his fault, but I seem to remember it was mine. Anyway, another one had to be hastily made at the BBC workshops back in London and curried over to location. It was bound to happen sooner or later, we philosophized. One night, we decided to sample the delights of the hotel bar for a change, a night which happily coincided with the local policeman's ball. After a few jars, Tom, Glyn, and I grew bold and decided to gate-crash the do, which, conveniently enough, was in a cavernous ballroom just off the bar. Luckily, it was dimly lit, so no one saw us enter. We hung around the back for a few minutes as a local bigwig was holding forth from the stage, and found it all very boring. Tom was just about to suggest our leaving when, suddenly, Glyn puffed out his chest and started a horrendously long rendition of Some Enchanted Evening. A couple of hundred or so mystified heads whipped round to see where the singing was coming from, and the bigwig faltered in his speech. Tom and I shot for the door, leaving poor Glyn to finish his rendition. He did get a round of applause, though. He was nonplussed to discover that we had deserted him, probably used to it, and casually joined us back in the bar, where he ordered another round of drinks. Naturally, we laughed ourselves silly that night, especially as some policemen came round afterwards to congratulate Glyn on livening up an otherwise tedious evening for them. For the first time ever on the series, we were quite sad for filming to be over, and were soon travelling back to London, carrying our happy memories of Suffolk with us. Studio filming began at the Beeb, and was soon completed. Norman seemed happy with it all, and retired to the cutting and editing rooms with the special effects guys. The story's eponymous monster relied somewhat heavily on split-screen technology, and turned out to be a huge disappointment on screen, as it was so obviously victim to the pitiful budget, with a visible line appearing between the join of the mottled giant squid and the location footage. It did not help that our producer, Graham Williams, was taken ill around this time and replaced by script editor Anthony Reed and production unit manager John Nathan Turner, who had to oversee the whole project sporadically, whilst also performing their own jobs. The double workload defeated them somewhat, alas. Anthony, only coincidentally, left the series after Kroll, and suggested Douglas Adams as his replacement, who accepted the post with alacrity. This was wonderful news for Tom, John, and me, as we had enjoyed Douglas's input so much during the filming of The Pirate Planet, which, of course, he had penned. We were sorry to see Anthony go, though, being as he was one of the best script editors at the BBC at that time. All in all, I think The Power of Kroll worked fairly well, despite the poor quality of the monster, which was purported to be the largest ever and who. Its appearance was such a crucial factor in the action, as well as being the fifth segment of the Key to Time, so needed to have a credibility which, frankly, just was not there. Fans had declared this to be their least favourite in the Key to Time series, and I cannot help but agree, although surprisingly, some of the series' wittiest lines crop up in it. I know it was not Tom's favourite either, but still, we'll always have Woodbridge.